Hey everyone! Ready to dig into something pretty fascinating. We're diving into social structures today.
Ooh, social structures. Love it.
Yeah, you know those invisible lines that kind of separate us into different groups based on things like gender, age, all that?
Right, right. Like those categories we think are just natural.
Exactly, but what if I said a lot of what we think is natural is actually, well, made by culture?
It's easy to think, like, societies just evolve in a straight line from simple to complex, but it's so much more interesting than that.
Totally. And to help us unpack all of this, we're cracking open a social anthropology textbook today.
Always a good time.
Chapter 9 specifically, it dives into this whole idea of social differentiation.
Ah, yes, social differentiation, the root of many a dinner table debate.
Right. Like, ever notice how some societies just have, like, tons of levels and ranks while others are way more fluid?
Absolutely. The textbook makes a key distinction here between, get this, vertical differentiation, all about those power hierarchies. Think CEO versus intern.
Okay, I'm with you.
And then there's horizontal differentiation
Yeah.
differences that aren't really about power, more like being a doctor versus a lawyer.
Gotcha. So it's not always about being higher up on the ladder. Sometimes it's just different paths.
Exactly.
So picture this. You hear hunter-gatherer, right? And you're probably imagining this small group just vibing in perfect harmony.
Sharing is caring, right?
Right. But buckle up, because turns out even those seemingly simple societies have, you guessed it, systems of order, and they're not always as primitive as we might think.
Yeah. For ages, anthropologists were all about the hunting part of hunter-gatherer.
Makes sense. It is in the name.
Right. But as researchers started looking closer, especially the roles women play gathering food, raising kids, holding the community together, they realized those power dynamics were not so simple.
I like where this is going.
It's like assuming the loudest person at the party is the one in charge, when actually it might be the quiet observer in the corner pulling all the strings.
Love that analogy. Which brings us to our first big theme, debunking those natural assumptions about gender.
Ah, yes, gender. Always a fun one to unpack.
Always. And to really get into it, gotta clarify. Sex versus gender. When anthropologists say sex, they mean the biological stuff, male and female.
Or the anatomy, if you will.
But gender, that's all about the roles, the behaviors, the identities a society says go with being a man or a woman. Or, increasingly these days, existing outside that binary altogether.
Now, that's where things get really interesting. Challenging those old assumptions.
100%. And for years, some anthropologists, they were determined to find this original matriarchy.
Oh, you mean that idea that way back when women ruled the world?
Exactly. They were looking for proof that early societies were actually female-dominated, like hoping to find some lost Amazonian tribe where women called all the shots. But as more feminist anthropologists got involved in the 1970s, they found something crucial.
Let me guess. They realized this original matriarchy was more fantasy than fact.
You know it. More like a myth, really. And a pretty telling one at that, right?
Because it's almost as if in societies where men had become dominant, they created these stories about a time when women were in charge and everything was terrible. Like a cautionary tale.
Right. A warning from history, but one they made up themselves, like trying to convince everyone that male dominance wasn't a choice, but the only natural order.
Exactly. And they even had a handy scapegoat for when things went wrong. Must have been those women in charge.
It was all going so well until... So, picture this for a second. You're a Munduruku man living in the Amazon rainforest.
Okay, I'm imagining. Lush greenery, the sounds of the forest.
You spend your days hunting. You've got your own special men's house, separate from the women's.
Sounds pretty good so far.
Right. And you tell these stories about that time when women ruled and it was a total disaster. From the outside looking in, classic male-dominated society, right?
Seems like it. But I have a feeling there's more to the story.
Always. Here's the catch. While the men are busy hunting and telling tales, it's actually the women doing most of the farming, the actual food production. They're the ones making sure everyone eats.
So those myths about a chaotic matriarchy, that's not just storytelling. That's masking some deep-seated anxiety about female power.
Exactly. They're basically saying, look, we have to be in charge otherwise. It's like they're accidentally proving the point they're trying to disprove.
Behind every powerful man.
Right.
You know what they say. But we're going to pause right there and unpack that idea even further in part 2 of our deep dive.
It's wild how these power dynamics play out, right? Like the Munduruku men, so worried about women being in charge, they basically create this system that, well, kind of proves why women could be in charge. Right. It's like they're accidentally making the argument for the very thing they're afraid of.
Exactly. Which brings us to this concept anthropologists talk about, the public-private sphere divide. You ever notice how in so many cultures there's this unspoken rule? Men out in the world, politics, business, big decisions. Women home, family, the private stuff.
Oh yeah, like those old photos, men in suits on a trading floor, women in the kitchen.
Precisely. But here's the thing. This neat little division, not always so neat, our textbook throws us a curveball. Portuguese women, Saloio region, back in the 1960s.
Okay, tell me more about these Saloia women. What's their deal?
So, on paper, limited rights. Couldn't vote. Their legal status was tied to their husbands. Men had all the official power, the drill.
Sounds pretty standard for the time, unfortunately.
Right. But in practice, these women, they were powerful in their communities.
Now that's what I'm talking about. How'd they pull that off?
Strategy, my friend. See, the men, mostly farmers, often isolated on their own land. The women, they went to market, managed the family money. They were the ones out and about in the village.
So they had their fingers on the pulse of everything.
Exactly. They built these networks, sharing information, resources, even influencing local politics. How? By strategically lobbying the wives of those powerful men.
It's that behind every great man thing in action.
You got it. Proof that you can't just look at the rule book. Sometimes the real power is in the shadows, the spaces we least expect. It's like, if power's a game, I gotta learn the unwritten rules too.
Love that. Okay, but if power can be so sneaky, how do anthropologists even find it?
Great question, and the textbook throws us another curveball. With this question, it might sound kind of weird at first, but are men to women as culture is to nature?
Okay, that does sound a little riddles, but I'm guessing it's not as simple as men are from Mars, women are from Venus.
Right. Definitely more nuanced than that. What's interesting is how societies use this idea of natural differences to explain or really justify how things are. Think about it. In many cultures, women's bodies, right, so tied to childbirth, menstruation, these biological functions, they get seen as being closer to nature.
Which, let's be real, is often seen as the opposite of culture.
Right. Nature's wild, unpredictable, maybe even a little dangerous, especially compared to the order and control of culture. So if women are seen as closer to nature,
they're the ones who need to be controlled, kept in check by culture, which is, surprise, surprise, often made by men.
Exactly. It's a way to say men are the architects of civilization, while women are these, like, forces of nature that need taming, which obviously is used to justify all sorts of messed up inequalities.
It's like saying men are inherently equipped to play the game of power while women are stuck on the sidelines, not because they can't play, but because someone rigged the rules.
And wrote those rigged rules into the very fabric of society.
Exactly. But knowing this textbook, I'm guessing we're not just throwing in the towel on this whole men versus women, culture versus nature thing.
You know me too well. The book is quick to point out this is way too simple. Plenty of cultures where women are the keepers of traditions, the storytellers, the ones passing down knowledge. And in some places, it's men's sexuality that's the wild thing, the force that needs containing.
So it's not really about some inherent truth about men and women. It's about who gets to decide what natural even means.
Exactly. And those decisions, almost always made by whoever's already in power.
Yeah.
But this whole natural versus cultural thing, it doesn't just apply to gender. Get ready for a mind bender, because we're moving on to another universal human experience where these lines get really blurry age.
You know how we always say age is just a number?
Oh, tell me about it.
Right. But after this deep dive, I'm thinking maybe that's only partly true.
Yeah, how so?
Well, every society's got ways of being like, okay, you're the younger generation, you're the older generation. But what those categories actually mean, totally different.
That's what's so fascinating about culture, right? It's not just about age. It's about the meaning we give to age.
Yeah.
And how that plays into power, status, all of that.
Exactly. And this whole natural versus cultural thing we've been talking about. Age is a prime example. Like, the textbook talks about how in a lot of non-industrial societies, getting older, it means you actually gain status, authority.
It's true. Think about elders in many indigenous cultures. They're not trying to hide their age. They're revered for it.
It's like instead of dreading those birthday candles, they're adding more to the cake.
Exactly. They're the keepers of wisdom, the storytellers, the ones who hold the history of the community. Total opposite of that whole Western youth obsession.
Which, let's be real, can be a lot of pressure.
Oh, absolutely. And it gets even wilder. The textbook talks about how Tesla, right, the self-driving car.
Yeah, what about it?
So they programmed the algorithm to prioritize saving an oldie person over a child in Japan.
Whoa, really?
But in the U.S., they programmed it to do the opposite.
Wait, seriously, that's That's intense.
Right, same technology, completely different cultural values baked in.
It really makes you think, what else is coded into the tech we use every day that we don't even realize?
Right, like whose values are we building into the future? But anyway, even in societies where getting older does mean moving up the ladder, there are still these transitions, rituals that mark the way.
Oh, totally, like rites of passage. Speaking of, the textbook talks about this incredible initiation ritual for young men in the Kaguru people.
Oh yeah, the Kogaroo. Fascinating stuff. It's a classic example of what anthropologist Victor Turner called separation, liminality, and reintegration.
Okay, break that down for me.
So first, they take these young men, separate them from their families, the whole community really, often out in the wilderness somewhere.
Okay, so like a physical separation to represent leaving childhood behind.
Exactly. It's a symbolic break from everything they know. Then comes the liminal phase, that in-between stage. They're not kids anymore, but they're not adults yet either.
You're in limbo.
Right. And often, they're put through these trials, taught secret knowledge, stripped of their old identities.
Like a crash course in adulting, but way more intense.
For sure. And then, the final stage, reintegration. They come back to the community, transformed, new names, new responsibilities, whole new social standing. They've faced the music, proven themselves.
They've earned their place in the tribe.
Exactly. Makes you wonder, right? What are our rites of passage in modern Western society? Graduations, maybe? Getting your driver's license? First heartbreak?
Yeah, we've got those milestones, but they don't hit the same. It's like, what does it even mean to be an adult these days? We're less tied to tradition, more focused on like individual journeys.
Right. And the old markers, stable job, house, marriage, kids, not the norm for everyone anymore. Makes you wonder how those cultural shifts will change how we think about age and transitions in the future.
Big questions. And as we wrap up this deep dive into social structures, I'm realizing how much we just like assume about gender, age, power.
It's easy to take those categories for granted, think they're just natural, inevitable.
Right. But as we've seen, they're so complex, so culturally constructed. It's all about who gets to decide who benefits from those decisions.
And once you start to see those hidden dynamics, you can't unsee them. It's about asking those critical questions. Who's included, who's excluded, and why? Whose voices are heard, whose are silenced? And most importantly, what can we do to create a more just and equitable world for everyone, regardless of gender, age, or any other category that's been used to divide us?
Couldn't have said it better myself. For everyone listening, keep asking those big questions, keep challenging those assumptions, and most importantly, keep on diving deep.